Welcome back to Soul Sessions with me, Emma. This is episode 28, would you believe it? And I am just so happy that you're here with me today. I've got a lovely topic to talk about today. I think it's relevant to almost everybody. We're going to focus on the topic of the ego and how it stops us from living the life that we truly deserve. If you follow my podcast, or if you have not yet, I would love if you subscribe or comment. It really means a lot to me. It means that I can keep going forward with this podcast and reach more people. Have you ever known exactly what you wanted to do, but you found yourself talking yourself out of it? So that talking yourself out of it is often coming from the ego. What exactly is the ego? Well, I see the ego as an overprotective bodyguard. Its job is to keep us safe. And the problem is that the ego can't tell the difference between genuine danger and personal growth. To the ego, rejection, failure, embarrassment, starting over again, speaking up, and changing something in your life feels really dangerous. And anything uncertain, in fact, feels dangerous and unsafe. So the ego does exactly what it's designed to do. It tries to keep you where you are. And here's what's really interesting. The ego doesn't actually care whether you're happy. It cares whether you're safe. Now that's a huge difference. The ego would rather keep you in a situation that's familiar than encourage you into something unknown, even if that familiar situation is making you miserable. Look, I think we've all experienced this. People stay in jobs they hate, relationships they've outgrown. They put dreams on hold, not because they don't know something needs to change, but because the unknown feels scarier than the familiar. And if I'm honest, I think much of this last year in particular has been me coming face to face with my own ego. For nearly 20 years, I knew who I was, at least I thought I did. I was a teacher, I was teaching, and teaching wasn't my job. It was part of my identity. It was how I introduced myself. It was how other people saw me. It gave me structure, purpose, and certainty. And if someone asked me what I did, I had an answer. And what nobody actually tells you about making a major life change is that sometimes the hardest part isn't what you're moving towards, it's what you're leaving behind. For example, I wasn't just leaving a career, I was leaving an identity. And for a while, I found myself standing in this in between space, not fully letting go of the old version of me and not fully entering into this new version either. And that's where the ego gets really loud, because the ego loves certainty. The ego loves labels, it loves predictability, it knows exactly what's coming next. But life doesn't work like that. And I got a really powerful reminder of this recently when I went back to Dubai. Now, I have this interesting relationship with the city because I love the energy of the place. I love the sunshine. There's a lot of very ambitious people there, a lot of opportunities. It's a place, however, where it's very easy to measure yourself against everyone around you. What car they're driving, what job they have, how much money they're making, where they live, what they own. And if I'm honest, I really got sucked into that mindset for a while. I found myself thinking, have I made a mistake? Transitioning into another career. I don't have a steady salary. I'm living at home. I'm trying to build something from scratch. Well, feels like that. And I found myself thinking everyone else is moving forward and I'm moving backward. And to be quite frank, I just felt like an absolute failure. And I fell into this really low mood for probably the first 2 weeks when I arrived there. And when I really think about it and reflect on it, it really was my ego being extremely loud, telling me that I'm a failure because I don't have all of these things that quote unquote society says is successful. And I also realized when I reflected that I was trying to measure myself using somebody else's scoreboard. And that's exactly what the ego does. It loves comparison, it loves status, it loves external validation. The ego wants proof that you're doing okay. But sitting with those feelings, I realized something. If I had stayed on that path that looked successful from the outside, but felt wrong on the inside, I would be still living in the ego. I thought of this concept recently. I see life as having two timelines. One is the ego timeline and the other is the soul timeline. Now, the ego timeline is really predictable. It's what 99% of us follow. It's a path where nothing really changes. It has the same fears, the same habits, the same excuses, and the same outcomes. It's really safe, it's comfortable, and it's familiar. But often it's deeply unfulfilling. Then there's the soul timeline, which begins the moment you make a different choice. You apply for the job, you leave the relationship, you start the business, you book that flight to the place you've always wanted to visit, and you have that difficult conversation that you've been meaning to have forever. You trust yourself enough to take the next step. And from that moment onwards, everything changes. You meet different people, you gain new experiences, you discover strengths you didn't know you had, and opportunities just appear that would never have existed on the other timeline. Wonderfully, these possibilities enter the picture. And this is something that I've come to realize recently. So many people spend majority of their time creating anxiety about a future that doesn't even exist. They ask themselves questions like, what if it doesn't work out? What if I don't make enough money? What if I end up alone? What if I've made a mistake? But what they're doing is they're worrying about a future version of themselves based on who they are today. But that's impossible because the moment you make a different choice, you're immediately on a different timeline. And essentially, you're a different person making that choice now. And the moment you're on a different timeline, new opportunities open up, new pathways are formed. So the future that you had created in your mind that has created so much anxiety, the outcome is different. Like you change and the people around you change and the opportunities available to you change. So yes, the ego timeline, it is predictable, but the soul timeline, it's unknown. So that is why people tend not to want to go there. But there's only growth in that soul timeline. When you put yourself in uncomfortable situations, that's where real growth happens. And also, when you overcome those situations, that's where confidence lies as well. So I've seen this many times where people say, I just can't do that. I'm not confident enough. But I ask them, have you tried? And they haven't even done that first thing. They haven't taken that first step. So how do they know they can't do it? And also, it often takes just looking at things one step at a time rather than the big picture. So, for example, if I look back on my career as a teacher, I'm an English teacher and I'd be asking a student to present something. And a lot of it, of course, starts with having the safety of someone who's not going to criticize you, that somebody's going to be there for you when you're trying something difficult. But you're encouraging to stand up in front of a group of people, which might be very daunting for the majority of people, but making them, or not making them, but encourage them to do this, it also helps them to overcome the fear. Because when they do that thing, they realize it wasn't so difficult after all, and then they're more likely to do it again. And that's why I think, having a good mentor, having a good teacher, having a good coach, it's really, really valuable because often we're so trapped inside of our own thinking that we can't see clearly. And remember, the ego is there to protect us, not to make us happy. So the ego is going to find every single type of logical explanation to stop you from doing the thing. And it often disguises fear as logic, and it disguises avoidance as caution, and disguises settling as being realistic. I mean, I've heard that so many times. And sometimes we just need someone to help us recognize the difference. So, how do we quieten the ego? How do we quiet the ego? Well, the first step is awareness. Simply noticing the stories you're telling yourself, noticing how often your thoughts are focusing on the fear rather than the possibility. The second is you have to come into the body, because when you shut off the thoughts and get into the feeling, you're more likely to make that choice. That's the second way to quieten the ego, is to get out of the head and into the body. So whatever method works for you, breathwork can be really great for that. It helps your nervous system relax, and it creates an element of safety within your body, and it shuts off that monkey mind and gets you back into the feeling and making the choice that's right for your soul, basically. And the third one is spending time in nature. I mean, there's something really magical about being in nature that makes you not only think about yourself as a smaller than the world around us, and really puts us into and really takes us out of our ego state, but it helps provide the biggest insights that we can get from reading a book or a podcast. You know, that element of sitting still and just really listening to ourselves, giving ourselves enough space to hear yourself. And the fourth is the action. This is the biggest one, and actually this is the hardest one for people to do, because remember, the ego wants certainty and the soul, well, it moves forward anyway. Let's be honest, we're never fully ready for any major decision that we make. I know that's true for me. I mean, my method, whether it's right or wrong, in the past has always been to make the decision, accept the job, book the flights, go to the event, and worry about it later. And I mean, it's worked for me when I look back now, because my soul was answering first. And then my head, of course, kicks in and goes, "What are you doing, Emma? You don't know anyone. How are you going to make this work?" You know, all of these thoughts come into your head later. And that's what we all do. And remember, you know, if it's a soul decision, it's not going to be really loud. It's going to be something that is a feeling or a knowing. And, you know, most people are afraid of the things our soul is trying to guide us towards. And one thing I've learned is that the ego is very, very loud, and it makes you constantly compare, worry, seek reassurance. And it always asks, you know, are you really good enough for this? Are you achieving enough? Are you earning enough? Are you being enough? And it's exhausting. But when you begin to quiet the ego, something really beautiful happens. You stop making decisions based on fear. You stop living according to other people's expectations, and you stop chasing things simply because everyone else is chasing them. And instead, you begin building a life that's actually yours, that feels more aligned with you, that reflects your values, your wants, and your needs. And I think for me, this is what this life is all about. You know, we're all on our own individual journeys, and it can be just so easy to be trapped in this ego of comparing yourself to everyone else. Honestly, I understand this more than anybody. I'm in my 40s, and I tell myself all the time, like, I'm always concentrating on my age. And on one hand, I see this as a real advantage. You know, with age comes wisdom, and I'm so happy with all of the knowledge that I gained over the years. But as a woman in my 40s, there's an element of, am I a failure because the path of life didn't bring me to where I thought I'd be right now? You know, i.e., married with children, you know? But then you take a step back and you have to ask yourself, you know, what is it that my life is bringing me? What lessons am I learning? And I personally believe that we're all here to learn something. And for whatever reason, those particular elements were not supposed to be in my life right now. And I do believe in divine timing. I think that when you are connected to your soul timeline and you let go of the fear and you get into the surrendering of allowing life to happen, it's much more possible that the right things will find you. Because when you make decisions that are fear based, it's often the wrong decision. I'm sure you will agree with that. So, in conclusion, when we're talking about the ego, and let's say you have a really important decision to make soon, maybe stepping back and asking yourself, am I making this decision out of fear? Is this actually something where I'm seeking other people's approval? Is it because I'm worried what everyone else thinks of me? Or is there a deeper part of you when you really quieten the mind and quieten the ego where you genuinely do know the answer? And often it's the knowing the answer, but taking the next step that's the difficult thing. But when we can learn to just trust that initial feeling and trust in ourselves, trust in our path, and trusting in the next chapter, and it doesn't need to look like everyone else's. And remember, the ego always looks for certainty, but the soul never does. And the soul simply asks you to have courage, and the courage to take one step, the courage to trust yourself, and the courage to choose possibility over familiarity. Because every time you take that courageous step, you are already stepping into a completely different timeline. A timeline that's filled with people you haven't met yet, experiences you haven't had yet, and opportunities you currently can't see. And perhaps the life that you're longing for isn't waiting somewhere in the future. Perhaps it's waiting on the other side of a decision you're really scared to make today. Thank you so much for joining me for another soul session. If this topic resonated with you in any way, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave a comment, share this episode with someone who might need it, and pop on over to Instagram and find me on Soul Sessions with Emma and say a quick hi. I love to hear from you. Until the next time, take care of yourself, trust yourself, and keep listening to that voice within. It knows the way.